Yeah, but I had an opportunity to review the requisitions.
I'm fine with them.
Me too. Yes.
And yes.
Okay. That's it.
Any other add-ons?
No.
Agenda item. Andy Russell, front and center. Come on up here. There you are. Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, this is not uncommon for us to have people retire, but it is uncommon for us to have someone over here and do what we're about to do, because you've been such an important part of this county for such a long time. We wanted to make sure that we recognized your service, because it really was service to this county and the citizens of Warren County. So we wanted to make sure that you were recognized for this. And, you know, we actually, before we talk, I want to hear, tell us a little about your history, where you started, and because you've been here for the growth. Tell us your experience a little bit of what's gone on in Warren County in your eyes.
Well, it went from Mayberry to what it is today. I guess I've been here 40 years, and when I was in high school, I worked for my father, and the sheriff's office was bringing the patrol cars to our facility, and the mechanic up at County Garage at that time said something to me about working for him because he needed some help. So when I graduated, they had it lined up to where I went to work for the county. I was 18 years old, and they started me out at $3.75 an hour. And the county was paying half of that, and I think the federal government or the state was paying the other half. And John and I worked together that summer, and he left, he bought a business. So I kept doing the job, and they posted the job for chief mechanic, and I'd seen that. And I just kept working. And one of the commissioners came, because they used to come and see me all the time. Dave Smith was his name. He came up and seen me, and he said, Andy, he goes, did you see that job posting? I said, yes. He goes, aren't you going to put in for it? I said, aren't you going to hire an adult? Well, 40 years later, here I am, but we started out with 25 cars. We have over 500 today. We went from that two-bay facility to the facility we have today. It's state-of-the-art. It's got the best equipment you can get. It's well-funded. I've got a great crew, and I want to thank you guys for supporting us and all the other elected officials I had the time to work with. And I think what makes for a great group of people is the ones you surround yourself with. And if it wasn't for these people, I probably wouldn't be standing here. I'm
Nice.
very grateful.
Well, no, we're grateful for you that, you know, we get the department heads that'll come in and talk about budget, you know, once a year. And a lot of times that's one of our most important roles. And we know for a fact, when you came in and actually asked for something, you needed it. And we gave you so much credibility, and I don't think we hardly pressed you, because you so rarely ask for things, because you made do with what you had, and you were a great steward of county taxpayer dollars, and that was very important and critical for your role. When you actually asked for us for something, I think almost unanimously, we always provided it, because we knew you actually needed it. And so we take that very seriously, and you had so much credibility with us. Comments, or you guys want me to just kind of read our thing here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Very good. So I normally don't read these all the time, but we like you a lot, Andy.
Thank
We
you.
just want you to know that
Thank you.
we respect you a lot and we like you a lot. And I wanted to make sure that your recognition was due. And so I'll read this whole thing. Whereas Andy Russell is an outstanding public servant who has devoted himself to the citizens of Warren County, whereas Andy was born in Wilmington, Ohio on August 31st, 1962, and has resided in Lebanon for his entire life. And whereas Andy worked for Russell's Auto Repair Shop throughout high school and was hired as the assistant chief mechanic right after graduation, beginning his career with Warren County on May 27th, 1981. And whereas in October of 1981, so a whopping 5 months later, he took the position of chief mechanic. So in 5 months, you became a very big deal here in Warren County. Whereas during the beginning of his career, Andy ran the county's 2-car garage, and where he serviced the sheriff's office of 25 cruisers, and was instrumental in growing the operations to its current capacity, with his team servicing over 500 vehicles for 40 different agencies. And whereas after 40 years of dedicated service to Warren County, Mr. Russell is retiring. And whereas his retirement, Andy plans to work part-time at Russell's Auto Repair Shop, pursuing his other his pastimes of drag racing and spending time traveling, now therefore be it resolved to honor Andy Russell and to recognize him on this memorable occasion by proclaiming today, December 14th, 2021, as Robert Andy Russell Day in Warren County. So today, you have a day for you.
Thank you very much.
But you know what? It doesn't stop there. I feel like it's like,
There's
let's make a deal.
more.
There's more.
There's more.
Because, Andy, we actually thought, and we're going to come down here and stand with you. It wasn't just good enough, in our opinion, come on over here, just so I can take a picture of it for you, but it's not just good enough to have your day. We're actually naming the Warren County Robert Andy Russell Mechanics Garage. We're naming the garage. Speech.
I've got video and a picture, so.
You've been a lot to all of us, though. Thank you.
I appreciate had a great career. I wouldn't change anything. It was fun. Sad thing it's over. You know what? 40 years went by like that, so, you know, you guys don't understand how time travels. And I'm grateful. I had an outstanding career. Thank you very much.
We're always going to remember you. The garage is going to be named after you. That's awesome. Very good.
Thanks, Ted.
If you guys need to leave and go back to work, feel free. You know? We got nothing exciting. That's going to be the highlight of our morning, so nothing more exciting than that.
Bye, thank you. You too.
Very good. Tiff or Martin, do you guys want to talk about this? Tee it up for us?
Merry Christmas.
I'm the other Russell that I would accidentally get emails for.
That was such a feel-good.
No, it's good. I
Russell,
mean,
now I've got you up there.
I know
don't
it's the other Russell. It's not as good, so I apologize. I'm a let down. It's kind of hard to follow that.
True, so very true.
Yeah. So we're here to present the proposed 2022 annual tax budget for Warren County. We've worked with you for the last several months and other department heads and elected officials to bring this before you. I've shared some talking points with you. I'd like to go through some of those and then any questions that you might have. The proposed budget for next year, 2022, is $82,449,915. That's just the general fund budget itself specifically. When you add all the funds that you oversee, whether they be debt service, special revenue, enterprise, and other ones, the total budget for today or going into next year is $328,107,321. As normal, I think Tina has provided items for you as far as like breakdown. That breaks down to roughly a little under 60% for public safety, about 40% for general operations of the county, and then ancillary things from miscellaneous debt service and social services. When you compare the 2022 budget to 2021, it is up 5.79%. which is the target that you gave us was roughly 3%. When you look at all the funds in totality, we actually did hit that 3% target, actually about 2.94. Factors that had us over that 3% are some of the factors that we discussed, and you had folks that would come in and speak with you. One of the first items is what a lot of other private industry and public sectors are experiencing, and that's wage pressures. That's not only on the entry level, but for certified personnel. Example we've used in that was in the building and building zoning department, and then employee retention. Some of the other operational expenses that raised were with the new jail. One of the increases specifically we've discussed is the jail healthcare expenses. When you raise from 80 beds to nearly 500 beds, the healthcare that will need to be provided inside that jail is more expensive. That was to the tune of roughly about $1.5 million. Other things that are associated with the jail, we obviously have heard natural gas prices and other maintenance items are going to be more expensive, and that'll be something that we'll just have to continue to evaluate as we go through 2022. Other items that we're looking at, you had a conversation with your folks from telecom and their proactive nature with cybersecurity. That's something that's vitally important, and especially in protecting of the core services of 911 and the partners that we have out in the community. Some of the items that they've been working on have now moved into the maintenance phase with some of those contracts. And one of the last items that we've kind of said for the last several years is it's one of those items where we don't have a lot of delinquencies in our tax bills, and so the DTAC fund is lower, which then puts some of the treasurer and the prosecutor's functions more back onto the general fund. So that's just kind of an overview of where we are from a budget perspective going into next year for appropriations, and why we fell at that number that we did. We always like to try to give, we do this on a monthly basis, but I think it's also good for the public to hear where we're at financially. Through November of this year compared to last year, we're up in property taxes nearly $1 million collected more. Just a reminder, you passed the tax holiday going into 2022, and so there'll be about $24 million less that'll be collected next year because of the holiday. Some of the departments, zoning as an example, is anticipated with the growth in the filings that they have, that they'll have about $300,000 more that's anticipated. We've hit our target on investment income. It was lowered a little bit this past year from $4 million to 3.5, but we look like we're going to hit that 3.5. Sales tax revenue continues to be strong. This time over last year, we're up nearly 6%. And then a lot of the items that we talk about from a revenue versus expenditures, we have 113% more in revenues, and we have only spent 73% of the expenditures. And then a couple last little items is we continue with the infrastructure bank. I know that Tiff had a call yesterday from the engineer, Neil Tunison, and we are committed to pushing over $10 million for the infrastructure bank. And we still have the rainy day fund that was established in 2020 of $12 million. So we've been able to collect more, spend less, and keep those items intact. So that is kind of the overview. Any questions, comments? I feel like this is further away than it normally is. I don't know if it's
perfect.
Is it perfect? Okay, all righty.
Well, I just wanted to thank you and Tiffany and Tina and the entire team that helped pull all of this together. Lots and lots of meetings, and certainly grateful to all of our department heads who do a really great job of presenting budgets that are consistent with the way we manage in the county, and do so with, always thinking about the taxpayers, that it's their money, and they're the ones that are truly the great stewards of the taxpayer money, while continuing to do great services by them as well. So a special shout out to them. And then certainly our colleagues and partners, our other elected officials, for whom we have oversight on their budget, always great partners, and it's a real collaborative. I think I spent last week at the County Commissioners Association of Ohio's state conference, and I was reminded how lucky we are to have such strong partnerships with our other elected officials, because that is not always the case, and sometimes we might take it for granted. But I really appreciate all of their work too, and helping us to bring forward this budget that is fiscally conservative and responsible on behalf of the taxpayers, and you all should be commended for what you've done to help us get to this point to be able to approve the budget, so thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, obviously, I agree. The remarkable thing about this county is the fiscal responsibility, the fact that we are, I'm not sure that there's any county that has had a better track record than this county. And the fact that I don't believe that we've ever had a conflict with any of the countywide elected offices for whom we do budgeting for, where we've ever really disagreed with them or not approved, because they always come in with reasonable requests. I don't know, David, what your experience is, but since I've been here for 7 years, it has been a remarkable, collaboration with all of the offices, and they've always been consistently helpful to make sure that we can maintain a proper funding for them, but also not doing things that are antagonistic to us or what we perceive as the best thing for the county. They've always worked well with us.
No, I think Tiff would iterate this as well. We've had several conversations with elected officials that have come in this entire span dealing with COVID, and now who understand, especially as we were coming through COVID, we didn't know what to expect, and we're really willing to sit there and take some of the needs that they were originally going to sit there and ask for and put those back for a while. So we've had a lot of conversations, and I think that you've set the tone and tenor. They've continued to sit there and work with you on that, and quite frankly, while it's not easy, it definitely makes it significantly easier from a staff's perspective when we have the ability to have those direct and very fruitful conversations, not only with you, but staff, directors, and other elected officials.
Right, because it's obviously such a large part of what we do is related to those offices and the funding of those offices, the providing of facilities for those offices, and obviously the big thing that happened this year was the completion of the jail.
Correct.
Which was a huge matter. And obviously, our budget is, as pointed out by this, the most significant part of our budget relates to the courts, the sheriff, the prosecutor, emergency services. So thanks again for all your work, and it's really a pleasure serving as a commissioner in a county that has such good relationships with all of its countywide elected offices.
How much, the anticipated versus spent, what were those different, the deltas on those? How much more did we bring in versus how much less did we spend?
So let me get to my notes here. So right now we're on expenses. So if you look at last year, we had appropriated roughly, and I've just rounded, roughly $78 million for appropriations. And at the end of November, we have only spent 73% or $59 million of that. On the flip side, we anticipated there would be roughly $80 million in revenue, and through the end of November, we were sitting at $91 million, so we're about 113%. So 113% collected, 73% expended.
So I think that is our magic formula. People talk about it every year. How do you do it? What do you do that's different? By default, what is occurring in those two simple numbers, really four numbers, anticipated revenue versus anticipated expenditures, and then actual revenue versus actual expenditures, are millions and millions of dollars in difference.
Yeah, I have a bullet point, I didn't read it, but the bullet point I have underneath those two numbers is, and it kind of just goes to the philosophy that we continue to promote out there, receiving more than anticipated and spending less than budgeted.
Which is exactly what we intended to do, working with the county auditor. Want to give him a specific shout out. Matt Nolan doing such a great job as the chief financial officer for this county. But that intrinsically is building up a multi-million-dollar surplus, assuming things go as is. We actually just budget for kind of the worst case in both of those examples. So we're very proud with that. I echo the comments, very appropriate comments of both my colleagues on this matter. So that is our magic formula. But then there's two other points I want to more systemically point out. Number one is this county is not immune to the problems that are generated in Washington. This is 100%, we can quantify this, there is no doubt, this is a factual statement. Wage inflation is affecting us fairly dramatically. That, right? I mean, there's no opinion in that, correct?
Yeah, no, I think it comes on both as I put in here, I think it's really across the board from an entry-level worker perspective. I mean, she was in here earlier, but Sue Spencer, working with department heads, it is a challenge at times for applications and others to get in. So there's some wage pressures on the entry-level positions. And then one of the items that we did discuss with you from the building and zoning is when you have some of those high certified, or those certified areas, there's some significant challenges in that as well. So
About 53 minutes ago, the hottest inflation number in multiple decades was announced. This is happening in our country right now, and it's a direct correlation of what's going on with the fiscal irresponsibility that's happening in Washington. And people say it's no big deal, it doesn't affect me. Oh, yes, it does. Here it is in the most fiscally conservative county, probably in the nation, where we know what we're doing. All of a sudden, we're basically double our increase in projected budget increase, from 3% to almost 6%. And it's solely because that increase, the overage is solely because of wage inflation. And so I want to point that out. And number two, the really philosophical approach to doing this, for both of my colleagues, I wanted to report to you this firsthand. You guys are important players in Southwest Ohio and are on all sorts of important boards and know all sorts of important people. I happen to be on one such board, the Ready Cincinnati board, with the owners of the Reds and Western Southern and the biggest construction company in town, Turner Construction, and multiple bank presidents. So I happen to be on this small executive committee, and I walk into the meeting last week, and I say very little in those meetings. They ask some opinions on what's going on infrastructure and the things that we have going on up here. The board president looked right at me in front of everybody and said, "Thank you for what you guys did on your tax holiday, because it filtered down here. We got a tax reduction in Hamilton County for no other reason than one Cincinnati Enquirer article that said, why in the world are we able to do it? And our board, Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Grossman, and myself, our approach that it's not our money, it's the taxpayers' money." And that was literally quoted to the Hamilton County Commissioners, and they did a 180. And there's no other reason why they did that.
Well, I would tell you is, and she's happened to be here today, Marcy Longacre from the Treasurer's Office. I sit on a kind of a committee with the state treasurer and other folks here in Southwest Ohio, and the treasurer in Butler County said something to me on this Zoom call and said, "Martin, I'm looking to push the same thing that you did in Warren County." I mean, she didn't attribute to me, but said that what you guys did in Warren County, I'm trying to push over to have this done in Butler County as well. So it is getting traction significantly, not only in Hamilton, but that was made on that call that it needs to be pushed into Butler and others as well. So you did a significant example there that's being seen and is potentially being mimicked in other areas.
Which is really gratifying, I think, for our board, that sometimes we actually, for medium to borderline large county, what are we, the 10th largest county in the state out of 88, that I think we've led on so many issues. I think that's really gratifying, and for the folks to recognize that and directly attribute that to our board, I wanted to let my colleagues know that it's not unnoticed amongst really kind of the power players and Greater Cincinnati know where it's coming from. So with that, we'll entertain a motion to adopt the 2022 budget.
So moved.
Second.
And yes.
All righty.
Before you leave,
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, you can.
Behind, in your packet, behind the resolution to approve the budget, I have a second consent agenda relative to budget-related resolutions.
Yeah.
If you would like to also consider that consent agenda.
For salary increases.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
And yes.
Thank you.
My question is, it's now that the jail is completed and we had the sales tax, and maybe Tiffany, you can address this, or Martin, what is our status with regard to the need for the increase that was placed to pay for the jail?
Yeah, so I actually just did an analysis of that a couple weeks ago. We will still need the sales tax through the end of next year, which is when it's set to expire. We will also potentially eat into what we saved in order to pay the debt by a couple $1 million. So we saved $9 million ourselves. We will potentially eat into, depending upon how the sales tax actually does, but right now it looks like we will eat into that about $2 million. So we will still need the sales tax for the full 5 years, which ends next year, the end of next year.
Is next year 2022?
2022.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you'll-
so it expires at the end of 2022.
But you'll get dollars into a couple months into early 2023
Our
because
last
Well,
it's,
that's
debt
because there's a
service payment is in
3-month
20
lag.
Correct.
Yes, that's
Delay
correct.
collection.
correct.
Right.
Our last debt service payment is in June of 2023.
Okay.
So, and it's the largest, we kind of, we did not front load larger payments, we ended with larger payments. So I believe the last payment in June of 2023 is roughly $10 million.
And what was the ultimate bottom line on the total cost for the jail?
It's roughly like 51 or $52 million.
Okay, and what was our original projections on
56.
that? Right, so we came under the projections,
Right.
and we, of course, had a contract that had a cap on it. And so they met all of their requirements,
They did.
and they came under their budget, which again is sort of a hallmark of how this county operates with its contracting and what we expect and our expectations. And we actually hired a different person who was gonna do this, and then when they were not fulfilling our expectations with regard to cost and how they were gonna manage it, we changed horses. And then that resulted in extremely good experience.
Yeah, and I would say that Walton McNally is the architect, and then partnering up with Granger and doing that, I think was very well done, and they met our expectations and continue today. I mean, they're kind of slowly pulling themselves out, obviously, with a building that large. There's some small things that they come in, but they're very much finding those and fixing those and getting that done well.
Well, and that's, I know that we have certain benefits from being in Warren County. We have, a large county, a large tax base from which to pull. But jail funding was a huge topic last week in Columbus at the County Commissioners Association. And so many counties are struggling with how they are going to get their facilities constructed, let alone operating larger facilities. So we've really set up, not only we're good stewards for the taxpayers in the short term, but really set up the county for a long period of time since we chose not to finance this over a traditional term of government bond of 30 years or so. We've positioned ourselves to be able to avoid some of these really tough conversations that a lot of counties are having.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but we were looking at if we went out the traditional,
30-something million.
yeah, it was 20 to
million.
30 some million in carrying costs over the lifespan of it, and the fact that you're going to have that off in 5 years. And one thing that I didn't mention, but we talk about, debt service. This is the last year on the radio debt. So when that comes off, there will not be any debt.
General fund debt.
General fund debt. So we kept that on there just because the interest rate was so low compared to what we were at the time getting in the market. It just didn't make sense. So, but that's the last year for this as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You.
Very good. Next, we have a public hearing, it's continuation of the rezoning application of James Thomas to rezone just over 42 acres from I-1 light industrial to R1B single family, 1 acre densities with a PUD in Franklin Township. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Hadila Babidi, Planner 1 from RPC. Unfortunately, today Michelle is sick, so she's not able to present. I will present instead of her. And it's about Sycamore Creek Reserve, PUD Stage 1 in Franklin Township. Also, Tracy Stivers from Franklin Township is here to answer any questions. So again, the current zoning for this property is light industrial, and it was R1 2-acre density before 2012. Future land use for this property is single-family residential, and for Springboro, the future land use for this area to the south of the property is R1, to the east it's PUD, and employment development almost the rest of the area with highway business district by the highway area. The property has slight slopes and two streams with, and it's also heavily wooded. And it's within the groundwater protection area, which allows 1 unit per 5 acres, and this area is not served with sewer. So here we have like some issues about the groundwater area according to residential development. I will skip these slides and we can go back to them later if you need more clarification about this area. But just from our zoning code for this area, the requirements for the residential development is like 80% of the pre-development infiltration volume should be maintained, while for the non-residential development, it's 70%. And the proposal for this property, the applicant proposes 19 residential lots. Primary access will be from Sharts Road, and lots ranging in size from 1.39 acres to 4.04 acres. Homes will be consist of both ranch and two-story single-family homes with all natural building material such as bricks, stone, or wood siding, and all will be custom built. From when we prepared the staff report, we asked for comments from other departments and from Springboro, and this is what we received, like from Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. They mentioned that the group of residential housing to the west of this property have about 8 wells in use. So compromising the groundwater in this area might directly affect the integrity of the water in these wells, and the existing wells are from 50 to 1,000 feet from the western border of this property. Springboro doesn't see any issue with the development impacting the groundwater for Springboro. For the Warren County Combined Health District, since all the proposed lots will have septic, so they asked for that the applicant must obtain soil evaluations, and like the last line in this slide, they mentioned also that the applicant should consult with Ohio EPA regarding restrictions and prohibitions for those parcels. So the recommendation came from RPC Executive Committee, and the RDC was denial. The discussion for RPC centered around the following issues: that the impact of the development on streams, and the first one, it's the impact of the development on streams and the aquifers, and how to monitor and enforce the use of pesticides and fertilizers, and also the increase in density within the groundwater protection overlay. Another discussion was about the water service to the development, if it's from Warren County or Springboro, because according to Warren County Water and Sewer, they mentioned that they provide the water to this area, but they buy it from Springboro. So they asked the Springboro to provide the service like directly from Springboro to this area, and Springboro will provide the water service only with annexation. So here the motion was made by Mr. Palmer to recommend denial, and Mr. Dudas seconded the motion, and the motion passed with a vote of 7 aye, 5 nay, and 4 abstain. The RCZ decision was based on the following, almost the same. First one is the impact of residential versus industrial on streams and aquifers. The reality of building in the area with the restrictions to be placed on the site, policing pesticides and fertilizers, and also less dense development in the area, so like one unit per 5 acres to protect the aquifers. And Mr. Gibbs moved to recommend denial to the Warren County Commissioners. Mr. Sesta seconded the motion, and the rest said yes. So with this, I conclude my presentation. I can answer any questions. Also, Tracy is here, and Stan.
Welcome back, Tom.
Yeah, really. So you see, I didn't know that this was going to be the punchline of this thing. So is it also, do you agree with the recommendations or the vote of the committee recommendation here?
I mean, for us, for our, the staff, we recommended first approval, correct? And
With the
it came,
conditions.
but
But it's all about this aquifer, apparently. It's all about that. So is that, so what was the evidence on that?
I mean, it's all like mainly because of like the property, it's within the groundwater protection area. So here the like the total area of the property is about 42 acres, and like with this density, 1 unit per 5 acres, they can like only have 8, but the applicant proposes 19.
But that's assuming there's two hurdles here. I mean, yeah, we spent a lot of time on this one, and again, we're not saying anything bad about the potential home builder. It seems like a good person that has a quality product, elderly landowner that hasn't really tried to market this property for a long time. It's been zoned industrial for at least some time, or was it a really long time? Did you guys check on that?
It's light industrial after 2012. After like the amendment to the zoning code, but before 2012 it was R1, which is residential 2-acre density.
Right, so this property has industrial around part of it, but yet residential around part of it. So the number one hurdle for me is, like with all of these cases, I'm big on balanced growth. I don't like changing industrial property or business property over to residential to begin with. But that's what we're doing here. Then on top of that, this is literally right over the top of our aquifer. And that is why this groundwater overlay is on top of this, where even if we were to go over to residential, the standard zoning on this would be 5-acre lots. And so hurdle number one is, do we want to change it over to residential to begin with? Hurdle number two is, well, if we do that, then they actually want, for this particular parcel, fairly high intensity. Instead of 1 unit on a 5-acre lot, it's 1 unit on a 1-acre lot intensity. So from my book, there's a lot to overcome here. And then now we've gotten 2 recommendations for denial.
But I still don't understand, what's the imposition on the aquifer with regard to this development?
Fertilizer, use.
And here I have like.
Yeah, in a second, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
You hold on, okay.
Yeah, if you were going to answer the question, yeah.
Yeah. So here, Yeah, we have like the slide about the groundwater issue common to residential development. So first, like land covered with impervious surfaces such as homes, driveways, roads, and parking lots may have more runoff and less groundwater recharge. And increased groundwater recharge may occur if the runoff water naturally infiltrates on site or is infiltrated by rain gardens or other low-impact development techniques. Also, stormwater retention ponds may divert water that otherwise would recharge groundwater. Another reason it's roads and the use of road salt. Fertilization of lawns, improper waste disposal practices, dumping waste oil or antifreeze on the ground. So this all will affect like the aquifers.
Yeah, but this is industrial now, so it was, as of 2012, this was a residentially zoned area R1, and under that zoning, would this particular PUD have been permitted?
No, because it was, as you mentioned, like before 2012, it was R1, but then on 2012, there was an amendment for the zoning code, so it became as light industrial, but like the
Well, we didn't
property
change-
owner didn't ask for like rezoning it to light industrial.
Well, we didn't change it to light industrial without the owner going along with that. The owner went along with that change of zoning.
Well, an R1 wouldn't provide for this density.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
that was my first question. Then my second question is, so the owner in 2012, we couldn't have changed the zoning and imposed a new zoning on that owner without them approving of it.
Or at least not objecting.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sure.
This was, good morning, Commissioners. This was part of a comprehensive rezone that we did in 2012. So notification went out just by newspaper as well as by postcards. And what we've experienced is that several property owners didn't realize that their properties were being rezoned. So we're not sure whether this property owner was aware that their property was changing from residential to industrial.
All right, and that affects me too, because is this owner the same, or has the ownership changed hands? Do we
The
know?
ownership is the same. We've
Same,
not
yeah.
heard from the owner, so we don't know what, I mean, it's always possible that a property owner, notwithstanding the fact that it's publicly noticed and they get a postcard in the mail, it slips through the cracks and they don't notice it. But I've not heard any evidence that this particular property owner was unaware of. That's not been something
Yes.
that has been raised. He was
Okay.
unaware of the change. We've not heard from the property owner, but
But it's a big deal to have property that you own that is residentially zoned, and then all of a sudden, we rezone it, and all we do is send them out a little postcard saying that this is gonna happen, and you wanna come to a meeting or about it. I mean, all right, well,
Yeah, it was, Tina's reminding me, each one of our townships that were affected by this actually had local meetings. They notified when the property owners were, right, Stan? The townships actually held local meetings, and this was a year-long process where it wasn't just a single postcard generally.
That's correct. We had meetings in each township and notified residents that those meetings.
I thought we specifically went above and beyond, didn't we, Bruce, for people that were actually being rezoned, if I remember that correctly?
We did it for commercial properties primarily in Harlan and Washington Township. We had almost like spot zoning at the crossroads, but not for every property, and not so much in.
I thought up that 71 corridor, we did a lot, because there were some major changes there, and we spent a lot of time on that. There was a lot of public input, if I remember correctly.
For the 71 corridor, it was primarily the 123 and 71 process, where we did, in that rezoning, we did notify all the property owners.
Can you answer one more question related to Commissioner Grossman's question? Was the groundwater protection in our code prior to the map amendment?
Yes, it was.
2012?
Correct, yes.
So the density,
But the 5-acre density standard was not.
okay, what was the density?
There was not any kind of a density limitation. It was just a use limitation.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what's that mean?
It was just guidance in terms of how to, what development and what uses would be appropriate in the groundwater protection area, not so much a density.
So does the owner of this property know that we've got, that there, so let me just repeat what I think I'm hearing. So we've got an aquifer under this particular piece of property, maybe surrounding property, that is relating to water where we have wells and we get water that's used for water services in this area, correct?
And Springbrook, correct.
Okay, so the issue then is that when rainfall happens, the water seeps through the ground, gets into the aquifer, replenishes the aquifer, which is then tapped in through wells to provide water, right?
Correct.
Okay, so just so we laymen understand what's going on here, this area has some sort of protection that's imposed by what? Some sort of regulation or law?
Correct, but by the zoning code, which limits the impact to the impervious surface area as well as the density that can be built on the aquifer.
Because
But
the
the issue with the aquifer, as the aquifer groundwater protection overlay states, it's not just the quantity of water, but also the quality of water. So it's the uses that are allowed in the overlay.
Ohio EPA has comments on that also, don't they?
Well, we typically in these areas, what you do is you do a groundwater source protection plan. I'm not sure when this plan was done, but we did one in 2013 for the Renico Wellfields area. But the concept that applied there also applies to this area too, where it's more impactful to have industrial uses over the aquifer versus residential.
Okay, well, now what did you just tell me there? When you say it's more impactful, what? What does that mean?
For residential uses, it's primarily, can we pull up the slide again?
What I thought you said was that there is a more impact adversely on the aquifer from industrial use?
More potential impact for industrial uses than residential uses.
Depending on the industry.
Depending on the industry, correct, yes.
So would it be correct that the zoning that now is on this property could permit a development there that has more of an adverse impact upon the aquifer?
Possibly, because with industrial uses, you have the issue of impervious surface.
Well, I mean, they could put a
As
building
well.
on there with an entire parking lot over the whole area. And then they could completely block off this thing. Would that be allowable under current zoning?
No, it would not.
Okay.
There is a impervious surface ratio of 50%. So they could only cover 50% of the site.
Well, with the residential development that they're talking about here, what is its coverage? Does it meet that 50% requirement?
There's not a coverage for residential, but for residential, there's a density requirement of 1 unit per 5 acres.
Yeah, but you know what? If somebody puts up a house, most of their property, even if it's on 1 acre lots, is gonna be a lawn, right?
Correct, yes, but with industrial uses, the issue is not just the impervious surface, but also the potential for the chemicals that it may be using and storing.
Well, that has to be
So-
worse than in a residential area.
So that's what the 2013 source water protection plan showed.
So, you said something that I didn't quite understand, I didn't focus on in the previous meeting, but I think is important. So, the water issues that, I understand what you're saying, on industrial, there's this impervious surfaces.
Correct.
of 50%. Is that requirement a reason why this piece of property has not been developed as industrial property over the last 10 years? Is it a limiting factor as an industrial site, I guess is what I'm saying?
What we found is that, and when we recommended that figure of 50%, is that most of our industrial sites are probably almost lower than that. For example, the Racino is in an aquifer recharge area, and they've been able to develop at just above 50%. So it's not quite as limited as
Perhaps
would
the
expect.
developer can answer your question as to what effort, if any,
Has gone to try to, because it is, I mean, we talked about this last meeting, is that it is surrounded in, at least in its developable parts, in large part industrial, which is why this struck me as being such an odd, request. I've since gone and drove back there just so I could have a physical kind of see what it is. So it is definitely a wooded location. But that would be helpful to understand, in my view, if the only place that hasn't been, what is the reason why that hasn't been? Have they tried to market it? Is it limiting? Is the topography limiting in some way that it's just impractical for any commercial or industrial use to locate there? That would be helpful.
But Stan, isn't it also true that, I mean, one of the worst things that could happen, again, as I see it, protecting that aquifer is like job one. That's not a short-term thing. That's a literal disaster if that gets screwed up. Isn't that rule about density directly correlated to the potential, like, septic issues?
Yeah.
A failing septic system that leaks down into the ground.
Certainly, sir.
If you have 8 of them, there's 8 risk. If you have 20 of them, there's 20 risk, right, over that area. I mean, isn't that kind of common sense?
And I think that's why the limitation of 1 per 5, you have less risk. Correct, yes, you're correct.
Well, when, is this aquifer all under all these industrial areas that are right around there?
Yeah, everything in yellow, everything in the yellow color is like the groundwater protection area. And like this area is Franklin Township, so it's following our zoning code, so they have these restrictions. While with talking with Springboro, they don't have any regulations in regards of the groundwater protection area.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at the Google Earth of this area, this is remarkably industrially developed with large facilities and large parking lots. When did we start imposing these requirements on these people? Because it sure looks like the surrounding people didn't abide by it. 2012. Well, that's interesting because, so apparently, what happened in 2012 that we decided that we needed to protect this when all prior to that time, in this entire area, that wasn't being done?
Well, most of that area is in the city of Springboro. It wasn't subject to our zoning. So
Was it in our aquifer?
Yeah,
covered by
everything in
aquifer?
yellow is aquifer, and
That's what I'm looking at.
yeah,
But Superior does not have
Yeah, they don't.
standards for
For-
aquifer
What doesn't have standards?
Springboro.
Springboro.
Oh, okay, lucky them, I guess, right? I mean, obviously, we want to protect the aquifer, but, okay, I guess how serious is, in your opinion, how serious is the danger to this aquifer if this PUD is developed the way they're proposing?
They're recommending approval with the conditions.
I know, but I mean, okay, so, but we got these groups that have, well, we've got these other people that recommended against it, so I assume that they had some evidence for why they were recommending against it.
The developer wants to speak.
Okay, yeah, sure, well, David, is that the appropriate time? Okay.
I'm Rod Morris, 31 Eagle Court, Carlisle, Ohio. I'm with Associate Construction. I'm the vice president. I've been doing this for about 25 years. We're a custom home builder. We also do a lot of developing in the Carlisle, Franklin, Springboro area, or main areas, also Germantown. I've got 4 points that I'd like to make that kind of support this for residential and I think make a whole lot of sense. My first point would be it fits the comprehensive master plan and the original zoning on it, which was for residential. The owners, I talked to the owner's daughter, and she said that they weren't aware that the zoning was changed. Now, the guy that does own this is in his 90s, so whether they sent him a postcard and let him know, and he didn't come to any meetings, but they were not aware of it. They haven't actively marketed this property. They approached me about building a house in Carlisle. We contracted to build a house, and they said, hey, we've got this piece of ground. You know, all the people that own it are in their 90s. They're wanting to get rid of it. And I looked at it, and to me, it fits what we do. I understand the industrial is there, but I like the privacy of the setting. It's hard to find big lots in this area, and people want that right now. And so that's why that's why we were interested in developing the property for residential and changing the zoning.
Did the owners live on this property?
There is like an old abandoned dilapidated house and a barn back in there, so I don't know. At some point, somebody did live there, but they no longer do.
Do you know how long they've owned the property?
From when I researched the deeds, I believe it was in the early 80s that they purchased it, so maybe 84 or something like that.
And then it remained undeveloped ever since then?
Yeah, it's kind of like the family farm. They grew up there. They played, there's a.
Oh, so they did grow up there?
Yeah. So they're.
Okay, so, and sometime after that they moved, but they.
Yeah,
it
he
stayed
still
in the
lives.
family.
Mr. Thomas still lives on Charts Road somewhere, but it's not, I don't think, it's not this property, so. So that's my first point, is it does fit the comprehensive plan and was originally zoned for residential, and nobody really understands why it was. My guess would be is when Springboro developed the other piece, maybe they requested that it be changed, the zoning changed at that point. Maybe that's when it was, but I'm not sure.
Well, I for one, I don't have a problem with it being residential.
Yeah.
But the question is the aquifer.
Right, and I've got a solution to that too. We can set up an HOA with this. At my personal home, I use organic fertilizers. Those can be put right in the documents. People can sign off on it when they buy the property. I understand that's hard to police, maybe, possibly, but that is the solution to the problem. You use organic fertilizers. There's companies that do it, and that's all they would have to sign off on. Then they would have some legality with the HOA if they weren't using it, but that would be a solution to the concern with the fertilizers, because people do want to fertilize their yards and make them look nice. So my third point is this is very low density. 1.4 is the minimum lot size in here, up to 4-acre lots. We're talking about 19 lots on 42 acres. We're not talking about putting 100 homes on this, where it's going to have a greater effect on the aquifer there. So I don't, foresee this as being a problem with the acreage. Because if you look at the existing zoning there and what could be already built there, I mean, we could go in there and put 200 store lock units. We could put 500 RVs on that property. And that's what we do too. We do store locks. So that's our plan B if this doesn't go through. So think about that too, because that's what could be there if this doesn't work out. My fourth point is we've developed 2 properties that are in the same ground protection area. They're in the city of Springboro. It's Sawgrass, which is right off of Factory Road. So it's right in the same general area here. We've also, down even closer to the Dry Run Creek here, we've developed Ridge. We put 55 homes in there, and they're all in this groundwater protection area, and they all have sewer, water, and these people aren't being limited on what they can fertilize their yard. So I understand that's not in your jurisdiction, but Springboro is not following any of these groundwater protection area things. You look at all those yellow areas, and you're telling me all those people are using organic fertilizer or not fertilizing their yards? So this is a very small portion of that yellow area, and no other restrictions are being made on those property owners. So, in my opinion, they're all on the aquifer there. Why is this property the only one being subjected to this kind of criticism of, we're in a groundwater protection area? So that's, from a developer, these are the things that I see that I didn't see 25 years ago when we started developing, and now it's like, property owners have rights, they have rights to develop property, and you have to think about that perspective too, because if this doesn't happen, these folks are going to sell this to somebody else, and they're going to put commercial or industrial in there. And I don't see a difference in the effect. I think if it's residential, you're going to have less effect on the aquifer. So those are my points. I'm open to questions if anybody has any.
Can you, I know the lot sizes, I'm just curious of what is the market rate for the homes that you anticipate building there?
So this would be 500,000 plus homes in there, which is a little higher than what we normally do. We're normally bread and butter is probably 350 to about 550, but we realize these lots are going to be probably $100,000 lots, so it's, but there's definitely a market for that. This is very close to Springboro. It's very close to the highway. It's convenient, and so we see it as an opportunity, so.
Bruce, you got any thoughts on those comments?
And I'm curious, Bruce,
Well-
but before you answer, just to piggyback on, to think about is, why hasn't it been annexed into Springboro?
Yeah, I don't understand this gentleman's comparison to these other developments he's done, because he mentioned that those are on sewer, and that's the reason that Commissioner Young touched on and Stan talked about, that this is not on sewer. So, yeah, it would be logic. Now, if I was sitting up there, the next person I'd want to hear from is Tracy Stivers, the administrator from Franklin Township. And I would want to know, is Franklin Township more concerned about protecting the aquifer, or are they more concerned about losing this property to Springboro in an annexation?
That's-
Which is usually the most important thing to township trustees. So it'd be interesting to hear Franklin Township's position on this.
I have another question for you. Is the fact that all these areas are in this protection zone, but they're not complying with the kinds of protection requirements, apparently, I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's true, are we imposing something on this property which creates there's no equal protection? In other words, we're imposing something on this particular property that in actual fact, even though it's in the same protection zone, is not being imposed on other surrounding properties.
Yeah.
Does that create a problem?
We're not. We're equally applying the law. Springboro is the majority of that property, and the fact that they don't have a regulation is their jurisdiction, so we don't have any say in that.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I can tell you that because we've also built down here off of Lower Springboro, there's a plat called Saddlebrook Farm that has acreage lots, and none of those they're fertilizing with whatever they want. They're on the aquifer. Now, that was built 20 years ago, so I don't know when and I asked them, and they couldn't tell me when the water protection was put in, but whoever developed that property did not have to follow.
Well, clearly, there are certain things that are grandfathered, and once you kind of realize things, you
Right.
move forward of, wait, we should really be protecting this, let's have some rules.
Right, but 20 years ago, we didn't know about the aquifer. I mean, we've known about the aquifer for as long as, so at just some point, it hinders developers by making up these new rules about, now we're protecting the aquifer from these 19 homes.
But it protects public health, which we have the authority to do, and that's
understand.
why the regulation is put in effect. And I would hope in 20 years, we learned a lot about public health
I understand.
protection.
So do these, is it how long have the owners of this property been marketing this property for sale? Do you
They
know?
haven't marketed it. They offered it to me when I contracted to build their home. And I said, that's something we would be interested in, and that they haven't tried to sell it.
So there's been no attempt to sell it, no inability to sell it. This was an opportunity that came up because of a conversation about you building their home someplace else.
Right.
Okay.
Bruce, during the process, I mean, it was a backdoor, be careful what you wish for comment out of the developer of, I'm gonna put 500 RVs there. Do we have ability to regulate on the light industrial what goes there, even?
There wouldn't have to be a zone change. I assume there'd have to be a site plan review. So you would have this board would hear that, and that there would be those
Wouldn't that be-
regulations applicable that you
Sure,
could
but
enforce.
so if they put in something that was appropriate on the list of zoning, that, yeah, you can do this, but yet with the groundwater protection overlay, do we have any ability that, even though you're correctly zoned, we don't want blank on there? We don't want, chemical storage operation there. That's a light industrial use, but we don't like the application.
Yes, if you look at the applicable standards for a site plan review, and I don't know them off the top of my head, so I think there are some that we could require them to do things to mitigate that impact. Whether we can prohibit them from doing something, which is a use, I don't think so, to answer your question. But yes, the density would apply and the impervious surface ratio would apply. And what he's proposing, storage units and parking vehicles that can drip oil and antifreeze and so forth, I wouldn't think would be that significant an impact as opposed to some big industrial use, assuming they generate something that would have an adverse impact. But it would come back before you.
Besides the fertilizer issue, which you've tried to say that you could put on some HOA requirement to prohibit anything but organic fertilizer to obviate the problem there. There are other problems with your development relating to the protection of the aquifer. How would you address those?
Well, they have the conditions put in there that it was subject to. This, certain things, am I correct? Yeah.
Do the conditions that you've all recommended, if those are complied with, how does that impact the aquifer? Does that protect the aquifer sufficiently?
I'll let you guys answer that.
So for our staff report, we recommended approval, but with 19 conditions, and some of these conditions are recommendations from other departments, like in a way to control the impact on the aquifer.
Some of the conditions are related to protecting the aquifer, correct?
Correct.
Okay, are you willing to meet the conditions that they've recommended?
Yes.
Yes?
One of
And-
the conditions was also for the commission to determine the density that's allowed on the site.
Okay, does the density, are you recommending that we not go follow the density he wants, or?
We recommend that you discuss it with the applicant, certainly, in terms of determining what density is appropriate here.
So he wants 19 homes. Do you have a recommendation on density or not?
The RPC executive committee did not offer a recommendation in terms of the number of days.
Okay, does the density affect, I assume that the density affects the potential impact on the aquifer?
Correct, yes.
All right. You know, one of my problems with this is who's testified before anybody or commented about whether this development actually has an adverse impact upon the aquifer and whether or not the conditions will sufficiently obviate those concerns. Have we received any expert information on that?
I had the Ohio EPA testify during all of our zoning rewrite.
No, but I'm asking about this specific, since we've got your recommendation that we go forward with it, subject to us commenting about density and meeting these conditions, and he's willing to meet the conditions, the developer is willing to meet the conditions, then my question is, since the problem we've got with this is primarily protection of the aquifer, I don't, did anybody with expertise on the protection of the aquifer provide any evidence with regard to the impact of the proposed development with the conditions?
We received comments from several departments.
From soil and water and
Did soil
from
and
health.
water say, no, we don't want this?
No, they didn't say that, but this is what they mentioned here. This here, that the group of the residential housing, like next to this property, have 8 wells, and some of them are like within like 50 feet distance from the western border of this property, and they mentioned that this will compromise the groundwater in the area and might directly affect the integrity of the water in these wells.
Well, they're saying compromising the groundwater in this area might directly affect.
Yes.
So they're qualifying that, but here's what I don't see, is does this project, as proposed, with the conditions, compromise the groundwater in the area?
We don't have the expertise at the RPC level. This would take a specialist to
All right.
determine.
So
that.
really-
So what we have been basing our analysis on is just the general policies of the EPA, of, the other saltwater ground protection plans that we have done. So these are just general concepts that we have applied here.
So, okay, so in other words, Bruce, I'm kind of adrift with this. What I hear being said is that we've imposed conditions, they've left it up to us to talk about density. It appears that the conditions have been imposed to obviate part of the problem, but there's no expert opinion that's been rendered that demonstrates that this project, with the conditions met, at some level of density, maybe even the density he's got, would actually do anything other than maybe have an impact. Am I reading that wrong?
Well, you're talking about, we're at stage 1 here.
Correct.
So you're talking about a legislative process. So the government is not going to bring in expert testimony. The developer's not going to, because it's not in their best interest to get their development approved, to bring someone in to attest to those things unless someone forces them to do so as part of the process. So you could always ask the developer to get a report from an engineer to that effect. But at legislative process, you have discretion, and is there enough evidence, it's incorporated in your zoning code, is there enough evidence for you to rely upon to impose these conditions? So the worst thing, I guess, could happen is if you said no, the developer could challenge it on a facial challenge and try to get your decision overturned by the court. A facial challenge as to the application of these regulations to their property, not that the regulations in totality are facially unconstitutional. But they could do that.
Right, you're saying that's the worst case from what's presented right now. That's not what I'm trying to quantify. I'm quantifying if it stands as is and a light industrial development comes in there, which would I rather? It's the would you rather. Yeah, a storage facility of some sort, whether it's 500 RVs or 100 RVs sitting there dripping, is it over the top of, can we regulate it's over the top of concrete or asphalt, but then the runoff of that, and then that's all going somewhere, the detention pond goes too high, and then it's leaking out into the groundwater around it. So that's what I'm trying to quantify versus some number of higher end homes on that property. I'm almost leaning, again, I'm big on my gut. I mean, it's fine that we have experts, but we don't have experts for everything that comes before us. I've relied on my gut, and my gut says having any type of high intensity, especially like a sanitary sewer leach field or anything like that, or a septic system, anything like that 50 feet from one of our wells is not okay. If we went down this path, I am concerned that, okay, yeah, it doesn't sound bad, but in comparison to 5-acre lots, you know, could we work on, it's a 2-acre lot minimum, because there's only a handful of lots that are under 2 acres. Could we say it's a minimum of 2-acre lots, and we have to have the septic systems blank feet away from any existing wells? I think that would make me feel a lot better.
I do agree.
How do we get there mathematically? If the density by the code is 5-acre lots, and they're trying to deviate with that through the PUD, how do you mathematically get to 19?
19 is above what they would be allowed. Currently, with the 1 unit per 5, they'll be allowed 8 units.
I understand that, but they're asking the commissioners to deviate from that.
To get to 19.
Isn't there a 20% cap on that? Or is this a new base
Yeah, I thought a PUD,
application?
yeah.
Yeah, there is, but his base zoning that he's asking for allows, I think, about 1 unit per acre, so it's 43.
Oh, it's R1B.
Correct, yes.
Gotcha.
But one thing that we did do an analysis based on the previous zoning, the old zoning of R1, which allows 1 unit per 2 acres. And based on, you know, an assumption that probably about 10 to 15% of the site would be used in roadways, under the old zoning, they could possibly get 17 units. Correct. The old site, the old zone was R1.
Under R1,
It says
Sorry,
19.
19, I'm sorry.
so that's if the zoning had not been changed to industrial?
Correct.
Yes.
Are you telling me that it had been R1 still, that the 19 would have been allowed? Is that what you're saying? And that's what he's asking for?
Correct.
I'd love to hear from the township.
Okay,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Into the weeds on this. Tracy, hello?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks, Bruce, for calling me out.
You're important to us.
The township does not offer any objections to the R1, reverting back to the R1 zoning and the 19 homes being built there. Of course, to answer Bruce's question, are we more concerned with the aquifer or annexation? Well, we certainly don't want to be annexed, but public safety and public health is more of a priority than our wants and desires. So our primary concern is the aquifer, of course. We have been made aware that if this is kept commercial, that it is going to be annexed by Springboro. So either way, it's kind of a lose-lose for us, but, yeah.
Wait a second. It's more of a lose for you if the annexation occurs.
Exactly, yes, yeah,
So you're saying that if it remains with a commercial zoning.
Springboro.
and if Springboro intends to annex.
correct,
And they have contiguous property.
correct.
How do we know that's true?
I met with Mr. Pizzuto,
Okay, so that's. you got
straight from the
on
horse's
board.
mouth.
All right, well, so would your preference be that we permit this development at some density level?
Yes, that
For
is the
residential?
trustees, that is the opinion of the trustees,
And the trustees are willing to go with the 19
yes.
homes? Okay,
Any other questions?
nope, that's helpful.
Would it, Tracy, I'm curious, is if, in this meeting with Mr. Pizzuto, would it be to annex it for the purpose of industrial use, or would they have some other use for which they would rezone it?
So Mr. Pizzuto and I were actually meeting about another issue, and this came up. And my understanding from that conversation is that the city actually is going to make a attempt to purchase the property, and they are going to use half of it for commercial and half of it for their park, because they have a park just on the other side of it.
That's what I was wondering.
Right, well, and if that's the case, obviously the owners of this, other than the fact that they may prefer that it be residential than commercial, it sounds like the owners are not going to be adversely impacted. My guess is they'll get their money out of it.
Unless money's not their primary objective. Maybe they care
Yeah,
about
that's
the
what I'm saying.
land and the
It might not be
community.
their primary objective. They might have enough, well, I think money's gonna be an important objective,
Well, of course.
particularly with someone in their nineties.
But having it immediately adjacent to a park, you never know. I mean, they could say, want to expand this park, name it after our family, whatever.
There's all sorts of things, but I could,
But they've clearly not shown an interest in marketing it. I
Right.
mean, they are showing an interest to a preferred developer for which they have a personal relationship and feel that,
I would agree with that. If they wanted to market it, they've had plenty of time to do that.
okay. All right, so if you had your druthers, your trustees want us to permit this.
Yes, to residential.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy.
No problem.
Anyone else wish to testify on this matter? Yeah, this one's not clear-cut in my mind, because again, we talked about the high hurdle that I don't like changing, just period, end of story. I don't like changing from industrial to residential. I especially don't like it if we're increasing the density. However, this particular circumstance is somewhat unique. Public health and safety is right at the top of this, with it being over the aquifer, and whether we did something 20 years ago or not, we know it now, so now we have to protect it. But that's in the context of this property is going to be developed at some point. We don't know if it's 6 months or 6 years or whatever. At least part of this property is going to be developed. Sounds like, at least that's what it's being represented to us. We haven't heard from the property owner of, it'd be totally different if they said, oh, wait, if we don't sell here, we're donating it for a park or whatever. That's a totally different outcome. But we take people at their word, and if that's what we're being told, it's what we're being told. I wouldn't, I mean, after today's testimony, I personally, if we addressed the density question and specifically the leach field or septic tank area relative to the proximity of our existing wells, which we have to protect, I don't know what that number is, my gut is 50 feet's not enough. Is it 100 feet? Is it 500? I don't know. I mean, we'd probably have to have Mr. Broush or someone answer that question of, you know, how close to an existing well is that safe? So, you know, I'm not, and especially with the price point of, would I rather have a bunch of something parked on that lot, or would I rather have, you know, mid-double digits, you know, 15 to 20 homes that are 500,000 and above there? I'd probably take the latter. So today's testimony was somewhat important to me, that I think it swayed my opinion to some degree.
yeah, I appreciate the township's perspective in this, and I guess, Bruce, my issues, I just would want to make sure that the property owner is in agreement that this change is happening, since they've not marketed the property, and we now have knowledge that there is some other potential buyer out there that would not be interested in buying it at R1. Like, I just want to make sure that we're not doing something to the property owner that they understand the ramifications of what we're to do. So if for some reason they don't sell their property to this particular developer, which I believe that they have intention to do, but if it doesn't happen, that this now is their zoning, I guess it doesn't stop the city from annexing it at that point, because they can then rezone it, right?
They can.
So, but the property owner is the one that's filed an application to change this zoning? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
They have to sign the
They
application.
sign the application.
My only concern here is, I don't know why that number's 19. I thought I agree with the number Stan threw out a minute ago. It sounds to me like it's 16 and a half. If the density and intensity can be increased by 20%, and you gave them that bonus on the gross, they get 8 units, 1.5, and then if they get a 20%, that's almost 8 and a half. I don't know how you come up with 19.
The site is 42 acres. We're assuming that 10% of that 42 acres will be in the form of roads and infrastructure. So that's subtracted from the 42, leaving 37 buildable acres. 37 divided by 2.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Under the O, that number's for the O. But I'm looking at from a PUD standpoint, that they apply for a PUD. The only way they can deviate from the 5-acre density is for them to get a density and intensity use of a 20% bonus. 20% on the gross would be another almost 8.5 units added to the original 8, which makes 16 and a half.
They're asking for a PUD base of, what is the base? R1B, which allows 1 unit per acre. So at 1 unit per acre, they could get 42.
I keep forgetting
They
that.
could get 42, and then 42 could be increased by 20%.
But that's adjusted by the 1 unit per 5 acres because
Correct,
it's a recharge area. So they're not getting 2-acre lots. At best, they're getting 5-acre lots, which is 8 lots. And if you gave them a 20% bonus on top of that on the gross, that's another 8.5 lots. That's 16 and a half lots. Is the developer willing to alter that number? Does it work for him? Maybe you can negotiate that and make you feel better.
Well, let me ask you a different question. Condition 3 says the following. The Sycamore Creek Reserve Overlay PUD will comply with the standards of the Groundwater Protection Overlay District of the Warren County Rural Zoning Code, except standards exempt by the Warren County Board of County Commissioners. Well, I don't know what I'm exempting. Do I have to exempt anything for what they proposed?
No.
No? Okay, and if they have to meet the standards of the Groundwater Protection Overlay District, and if they are agreeing to meet those standards, why am I getting recommendations or voting to not approve this? I know you're not that way, but why am I worried about it if they're meeting those standards? Yes, go ahead. Well, I hope you're not gonna hurt yourself, because I think this helps you, if you're willing to meet them.
I just want to make another point. I did contact, my first call on this was Elmer Dudas at Springboro. They had no interest in annexing for residential. They had no interest in extending the sewers to us on this property either. But yet he's the first one in the meeting to deny it because they want it to expand their industrial park. So there's the first meeting that we had is somebody who has a conflict of interest making the proposal to not deny it. So
He
in my,
seconded the motion. She didn't account for how
Yeah,
Elmer
but
voted. Did he vote that way? You may remember, I don't.
yes, he did vote. He
Okay,
voted
all
for
right.
denial, so that, I'm just, because
Yeah,
that
so
was,
he-
that
He's
was
going to
a.
deny it because he wants to stop your thing so that it goes back to industrial, and then
Yep.
they're gonna purchase it.
And
for
I
their
have a
interest, and then
contract
they're
with the
gonna
owner,
annex it.
and they've probably already contacted the owner, and they haven't made that aware to me, but, this was the first that I've heard today that Springboro's interested in
And of
this
course,
property.
that industrial, whatever they do with industrial development, they're gonna have to meet these standards too. I mean, you know, I would think that the people in the area would prefer, to the extent that and there are residential people in this area, that they would prefer a residential development here
Well,
than.
but actually, I think if they annex it, they have no standard whatsoever on this,
Well, that's
right? I
right.
mean, that's the
Yeah.
point. I
Well,
mean,
that's even a better point.
Because in residential, they're not enforcing the
I'm-
groundwater protection.
Yeah.
Okay, then they don't have to meet these standards at all.
right,
But they don't want residential.
right.
Yeah,
But they
but-
still,
but
there
the-
are standards still for industrial. for
Yeah, but
this.
there are, and the fact of the matter is, we've already been told that the industrial impact could be worse. So it sounds to me, if that's true, then the only way for us to actually protect the area with our standards, which they're agreeing to do, is to permit this.
Yeah, I just would not want to give an impression that I think that the city of Springboro is not protecting the area.
Right.
It's merely they don't have the standards.
But they don't have to protect it.
That it
We
doesn't
no longer,
exist.
it will no longer be under our standards.
That's correct.
Right,
And we know from the surrounding area that they've not been doing it.
right.
That's
And
correct.
I can tell you also in our second meeting, there were homeowners here, and they were concerned about it being industrial, and they were more concerned about that than the
I
housing.
can imagine.
Because they said, I don't want to look at commercial buildings if I had my choice,
Does the
basically.
density, does the 19 homes, I mean, obviously, the lower the density, the better, the less impact on the aquifer.
Right.
What is your feeling about the 19 homes?
I said, that's two, less than 2 units per acre. So, I mean, he had mentioned that, 2 unit.
Well, it sounds like under the original zoning,
It would
the
fit.
19 homes would be possible.
Yeah,
But that's not the reality.
I know that, but at the same time, I'm a little, I'm unsure.
I don't want to
honestly.
negotiate with myself. Here's, you would get me on board if we said they were 2-acre minimum, and, which probably drops it to around 16 lots, I would imagine, instead of 19. And there was some sort of a setback, a minimum setback for the, dependent on what Soil and Water or our sanitary engineer says, some sort of a minimum setback for the septic system, which is what I'm most concerned about, away from our existing well fields.
I think I would be willing to work on the setback from the septic, but from the lot perspective, I don't think that we can do any less than 19 and make the numbers work for us, because I think that's very, very low density, so, in my opinion.
No,
It's
I'm
42
okay with the
acres.
19 because of the recommendation of our
Yeah.
staff on the 19.
But I don't think there's gonna be any within 50 feet. It's probably, these lots are, I think, I've got the map, they were 375 feet deep, and sometimes the septic systems are in the front of the home, so I can't see the septic systems being within a couple hundred feet of the nearest well.
It seems to me, David, that the best way for us, since my take on the zoning and the density goes back to a feeling that I think that this is the best for the neighborhood and the people of the surrounding area that are residential, that it preserves the property within the township, that it preserves the imposition of these groundwater protection overlay district standards that you're going to meet.
Right.
And if we don't approve it, it's going to remain a industrial, it's going to be annexed into another jurisdiction that doesn't have to comply with this, which doesn't mean that they're not going to, but we don't have any say in it any longer. So based upon that, I'm gonna make a motion that we approve
We have
this.
to close the hearing first,
Yeah,
don't
we
we?
gotta do that, exactly, I'm sorry, David.
Anybody else wish to speak on this subject? Bruce, anything else we should be considering here?
I think you discussed it.
Very good. Motion to close?
So moved.
Second.
Yes.
And then I'm gonna make a motion that we approve it based upon the staff recommendations and the fact that the applicant has agreed to comply with those regulations.
With the conditions.
With the conditions,
19
yes.
of them?
Yep, all 19.
19 conditions. And I'll second that.
Roll call?
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Grossman?
Yes.
Very good. Any other business to come before us in public? We're about to go into executive session.
I will make a motion then to go into executive session for pending litigation with our legal counsel and for acquisition of property.
And we do not anticipate any action being taken, so we'll probably just adjourn from there. And yes.
Yes. Say yes.
Yes.